Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I too, before we start, would like to start with heartfelt sympathies for everybody who currently is affected by the flooding in Serbia. But turning to energy, I'd like to also thank the Color Press Group for inviting me to speak. It's been about a year since I was last here to discuss energy, so I'd like to look at what's changed in the energy sector over these past 12 months. And I guess the short answer to that would be that not that much has changed, but also quite a bit. And I recognize that's somewhat confusing, so allow me to elaborate. To give you an idea about what's changed, I'll first go over where we were. When we met last spring, I said that energy security is economic and national security, and that energy security depends on diversification. And that means diversifying the sources, routes, and suppliers of energy. That fact has not changed. I mentioned that in Serbia, in terms of energy, is not very diverse and therefore not very secure. The World Energy Council gave Serbia a D ranking for energy security, the lowest score a country can receive. In the energy community, called the natural gas sector, Serbia's Achilles heel, because Serbia relies on Russia for its imports and domestic production. And unfortunately, Serbia's dependency has not changed. And lastly, I talked about Serbia's reliance on coal, its underutilization of its renewable energy potential, and lack of investment in energy efficiency. And I would say, for the most part, this too has not changed. But it's worth mentioning that a year is not a very long time in the energy field, and there have been some positive steps taken by the government to strengthen Serbia's energy sector. And before focusing on Serbia, I think it'd be useful to examine the international energy sector, because there have been some important developments that could affect Serbia. In the United States, the Department of Energy has conditionally approved export permits for up to 157 billion cubic meters of LNG per year, which is more than the EU imported from Russia in 2014. And in addition to LNG, Congress has lifted our ban on crude oil exports. Now, of course, market realities will determine production and export decisions, and the US is not exporting much oil or gas yet, but we have the potential to be a major market player. And we've also seen the global price of oil plummet and remain low. Now, this is good news for consumers such as Serbia, who will save money, but it's problematic for oil-dependent countries such as Russia and Venezuela, whose state budgets are taking a major hit. And there are some concerns that the drop in the price of fossil fuels may lead to a drop of investment in renewables. One may well ask, why invest in alternative energy when conventional production is so cheap? Well, the good news for Serbia and the rest of the world is that renewable energy prices also are falling fast. The price of solar PV panels has dropped over 80% since 2008. And in most parts of the United States, wind power prices have actually been lower than wholesale electricity prices. And a recent IMF report found that the world pays $5.3 trillion, yes, trillion dollars per year in hidden costs from burning fossil fuels. So if we consider those hidden costs and the rapidly decreasing prices of renewable energy, then renewables become much more attractive. Fortunately, we are seeing a commitment to renewable energy around the world. In the United States, President Obama released his Clean Power Plan last August. The president's plan aims to have 28% of our energy capacity come from renewable sources and reduce power sector emissions by 32% by 2030. And it's not just the United States. The Saudi Arabian oil minister said last year, quote, "We recognize that eventually, one of these days, we are not going to need fossil fuels. So we have embarked on a program to develop solar energy." If Saudi Arabia recognizes the importance of switching to renewables, then there's no reason the rest of us can as well. So those are some of the global developments in the past 12 months, but let's look at what's going on in Serbia. To the Energy Ministry and Mr. Bajatovic's credit, Serbia met its energy community commitment to legally unbundle Serbia gas. And similarly, I believe the government and ministry are committed to restructuring EPS. The key for Serbia will be to create a fair and competitive energy market because the current structure is unsustainable. And there is a lot of work to be done. But I believe the government is working towards this goal as it implements the new energy law and necessary bylaws. Serbia is energy insecure because it lacks diversified sources, routes, and suppliers of energy. And in terms of sources, Serbia relies heavily on lignite for electricity. Lignite poses numerous health and environmental hazards. According to a report by Europe's Health and Environmental Alliance, Serbia spends a minimum of 1.8 billion euros annually on additional healthcare costs and lost productivity just from the harmful pollutants emitted from its lignite power plants. To put that in perspective, 1.8 billion euros is 5.4% of GDP, and it's equal to all of Serbia's foreign direct investment from 2015. And unfortunately, the Alliance also found that each year, 2,000 people in Serbia die because of exposure to pollution from coal power plants. For the health of the population, Serbia should invest in cleaner sources of electricity generation, including cleaner coal technologies, carbon capture, and renewable sources. And now, given these enormous social costs of burning lignite and the decreasing costs of renewables that I mentioned earlier, it is unfortunate that Serbia still is only using 1/3 of its potential in renewable energy. The government's committed to have 27% of final energy consumption come from renewables by 2020, and that's up from about 22% now, but Serbia has not made significant progress toward that goal. However, the Energy Ministry has given companies licenses for 500 megawatts of wind energy. And as Minister Antic said, he is working hard to develop legislation to make wind energy projects bankable. And I sincerely applaud these efforts because to the extent the minister can bring wind power into Serbia's energy mix, he will make Serbia stronger and save lives. And increasing renewable power generation is a good and necessary way for Serbia to meet its energy community obligations. But there's another way to help accomplish this goal, and that's by decreasing energy consumption, by not wasting energy, and by increasing energy efficiency. Energy community data show that over 15% of Serbia's electricity is lost in transmission and distribution. The same data show that nearly 10% of Serbia's consumption comes from imports. If Serbia could improve its electrical system to decrease these losses, then it could cut imports. And a KfW study found that every euro invested in energy efficiency can generate between 4 and 5 euros of economic value. Investments in energy efficiency will help Serbia save money, create jobs, and generate economic growth. And I encourage the government to make those investments. And in the area of natural gas, unfortunately, Serbia still is entirely dependent on Russia and Gazprom, which is neither a safe nor secure place to be. I remember back in graduate school, I was a teaching assistant for microeconomics. And one of the questions on our final exam was, what are the effects of a monopoly? And one of my students wrote down, consumers get screwed. And while that's not the most professional or diplomatic answer, my student certainly got to the point. But in less earthy terms, countries such as Serbia that depend entirely on a single supplier are in a vulnerable position. Let's take, for example, Lithuania. Lithuania was dependent on Gazprom, as Serbia is now, but it started looking for other suppliers and building a floating LNG terminal. And according to Lithuania's energy minister, these steps toward diversification allowed them to decrease their price with Gazprom by over 20%. That is a huge price cut, and it's one that Serbia certainly could use. But of course, Lithuania needed to invest in an infrastructure that allowed it to diversify its energy supply. And that's something Serbia has not done yet. However, I was encouraged by the Prime Minister's statements last year in support of diversification and the Serbia-Bulgaria interconnector. This interconnector will allow Serbia to link up to the southern gas corridor and to LNG terminals in Greece to bring in new sources of gas. This will decrease Serbia's energy dependence, increase security, and cut the price of gas for Serbian consumers. And while the situation we had with the border closures last fall was horrible, I think it's a good example of the importance of diversification. Imagine if, when Hungary closed its border, there were no other roads to get out of Serbia. What would happen then? Trade would stop, people would be completely stuck, and that's the situation Serbia is in with its natural gas supply. Serbia has one import pipeline from Hungary. It is an off-ramp of the European pipeline infrastructure. Serbia needs to do more to diversify routes. And you might be thinking that I'm merely up here discussing abstract reasons to diversify and hypothetical what-ifs, but this is reality. Serbia has faced supply shocks before and will undoubtedly face them again, especially as Serbia's sole supplier says it will cut off transit through Ukraine in 2019. But even if we assume that Russia has the best intentions and that it would never use energy for political purposes, there could be technical problems with Serbia's one import route beyond anybody's control. And if that happens, Serbia will have no recourse. And that's why it's so important to move forward with interconnectors. Serbia needs to take responsibility for its own energy security because ultimately it's up to Serbia to decide whether it wants a robust energy supply or to remain wedded to an erratic supplier. If Serbia wants a secure energy supply and wants to be a regional leader and transit country, then it needs an infrastructure to support that ambition. This will require significant investments. But Serbia needs to invest in itself and in its future, because if Serbia is not willing to invest in itself, then why should anybody else? Geography has given Serbia an opportunity to play a major role in Southeastern Europe's energy security, but it's up to the government and Serbian people whether or not they want to capitalize on that. And Serbia has taken some steps towards a more robust energy sector, including the plans to restructure EPS and Serbia Gas, as well as the government's stated interest in building an interconnector with Bulgaria. And I commend the government for this, because these policies aren't always popular or easy, but there's a lot more to be done. The government should diversify its domestic sources of energy. That means moving away from traditional coal-fired power plants and toward clean, renewable sources. This will make Serbia more secure and help reach its 2020 targets, but more importantly, it will help Serbian citizens breathe easier in a literal sense by reducing harmful air pollution. And the government also should invest in energy efficiency measures in buildings and district heating systems and upgrade its electrical grid to decrease transmission and distribution losses. These investments will more than pay for themselves through energy savings and create jobs for Serbian workers. And lastly, Serbia needs to upgrade and expand its natural gas infrastructure. For too long, Serbia has allowed itself to remain insecure and vulnerable to the whims of a monopoly supplier and dependent on a single supply route. Energy security is too important for Serbia to be left without an alternative. I urge the government to move forward with regional interconnectors, because only through integration can Serbia become secure. And I want to wrap up by saying that when it comes to energy security, there are no quick fixes. This is a long-term issue. But just because Serbia may not suffer all of the consequences of being energy insecure immediately, that does not mean that you should not start taking action now. Serbia will continue to be vulnerable until it has diversified routes, sources, and suppliers of energy. Addressing this issue will require significant investments. But it's not as though Serbia isn't already paying a price now. There are enormous costs to inaction. Every time you heat your home, every time you turn on a light switch, every time you inhale polluted air, you pay a price. And these costs are only going to go up. Energy security may not be cheap, but it is much less expensive than energy dependency. And we in the United States, and I know my colleagues in the EU as well, want to see a stronger, more robust Serbia. And that will require Serbia to invest in its energy infrastructure. But those investments will save the government money, they will make Serbia stronger, and they will make the population healthier. I recognize these changes aren't easy, but the price of inaction is too much for Serbia to pay. Energy security is critical for Serbia's economic and national security, and it's up to Serbia to decide how secure it wants to be. And the United States and European Union look forward to supporting you in achieving that goal. Thank you.